Hello and welcome back to Intermittent Gaming with another Intermittent Gaming review. This time we're looking at Redeemer Enhanced Edition, which has just become available for PS4, Xbox One and Nintendo Switch. The game from Sabaka Studios is a Russian-made top-down brawler/shooter that was originally released for Steam back in 2017. Now I must admit, I never played the original, but this version that has now reached the consoles is certainly a tremendously fun game with a few little wrinkles that have maybe just let it down in one or two areas. I should mention I have reviewed this is a pre-release version of Redeemer Enhanced Edition on PS4 that was provided to me by the publisher. Okay, so let's start off with the good stuff. Redeemer is a surprisingly good looking game. Graphical quality is excellent, especially from such a small studio. And though it largely sticks to its top down viewpoint, it does swing down into a full 3D view to show off its visuals during some of their more violent finishing moves. The game starts simply enough, pitting you, a monk/ex-soldier hero, against the very military forces that you used to work for. Combat is introduced early on and is one of the more satisfying parts of the game. What starts as simple punch and kick button mashing fun develops into a heady mix of hand-to-hand combos, fast and frantic shooting, and eventually has you parrying, rolling, grabbing weapons from the enemy, charging whirlwind kicks to handle the groups, or smashing shields out of the hands and machine gunning enemies at a distance before ripping the head off a cyborg and throwing its exploding head into an oncoming flamethrower wielding armoured brute, then performing a quick finishing move to replenish some health before crashing into the next area and doing it all again. Now, it can get hard to keep track of all the new fighting mechanics at first, as a lot is introduced quite quickly in what is overall a relatively short game. But if you stick with it, you'll feel like an absolute badass pretty much all of the time. Whilst combat and enemies are nicely varied throughout the campaign, a special mention must also go to the theme of each chapter. At different times it provides flavours of Shadow Moses in Metal Gear universe, or I don't know, the overgrown science labs of Resident Evil 2, and even little flavours of the Shinra building from Final Fantasy VII, so it's a nice amount of variation going on in the locales. In fact, this is one thing that the game does incredibly well, borrowing from other games in just sort of taking out a couple of the best bits. For example, the combat has kind of powerful crunches and over-the-top violence of something like God of War, but it's also fused with that tactical, high-risk, high-reward gunplay and, of course, over-the-top violence of something like Doom, particularly given the fact that the game has no health pickups throughout the whole thing, and instead you can only replenish your vitality basically by performing certain finishes, killing enemies, even with upgraded weapons. Okay, a stealth game, this is definitely not. Okay, onto the bad. Where the game might fall a little short for some is that it is quite shallow. The story is brief, it's simple and very generic. It's not brilliantly well acted and gorgeously presented, but it also keeps the focus on the action, which for me at least made it more enjoyable. But those looking for a strong story, you're not going to find one here at all, unfortunately. Also, for all the variation in the combat and the level themes, it never really gets any more complex than kill everything in the room, move on. There are no puzzles or mazes or branching pathways or anything like that. That said, the well-balanced difficulty curve, something I believe they may have focused on for the Enhanced Edition, means there's always a challenge and you're always going to be making use of all the new moves and tactical ways of thinking that you've been developing as you play. So that is kind of a good aspect that comes out of a bad thing. Story is shallow, but the actual mechanics of the game are deep enough and interesting enough to kind of have you using all of them to meet the challenge the game offers. And finally, the ugly. The most frustrating part of my experience with this game was irritating bugs. Things like enemies occasionally passing through walls to attack you. Certain scenes won't trigger unless you perform a specific action, which can leave you stuck after an awesome fight, but because you didn't use the right finishing move to trigger the next scene, you can't really do anything in that particular section. That can get immensely frustrating at times. Even the menus have typos in and seem to get stuck and suffer from input lag at times. The game also just straight up crashed on me a couple of times, which isn't great. Thankfully, in this day and age, most of the uglier parts of my experience can, and no doubt will, be patched out quickly. Overall, I'm giving Redeemer Enhanced Edition a 7 out of 10, but if those bugs get fixed or patched out, I'd definitely push that up to an 8. A great game that's been great fun.